What if your body was not just a battlefield, but the battlefield itself? Picture this: the thundering roar of hooves across the windswept steppes, black banners fluttering like torn shadows under a sunless sky. Behind them, the smoke of 1,000 burning villages chokes the horizon. The Mongol horde has come not merely to kill, but to conquer in ways that blade and arrow alone cannot achieve. These men were not just soldiers, they were seeds. And they had one mission: erase a people not by fire alone, but by blood. Genghis Khan did not merely destroy his enemies, he replaced them from within. With every captured city came the same ritual. Men were slaughtered en masse, but the women they were kept divided by age, beauty, and status. And many were forced to bear the children of the very men who murdered their husbands, their fathers, their sons. This was no accident of war, no side effect of brutality. It was strategy, biological domination as policy, a quiet genocide enacted one womb at a time. He did not just rewrite borders, he rewrote bloodlines. And centuries later, the evidence is still etched in the human genome. Scientists have found a genetic marker traced back to one man, Genghis Khan, that lives on in more than 16 million men today. It worked. The most terrifying weapon Genghis Khan ever used was not forged of steel, it was flesh. And the most disturbing part, its legacy is not buried in ancient graves or forgotten chronicles. It lives on in the bodies of millions, in their blood, and maybe in yours. But how did one man turn sexual violence into a tool of empire, and why was the world powerless to stop him? Before he became the most feared name in history, Genghis Khan was just a boy named Temujin, born into a world where survival was a brutal game of blood, betrayal, and winter. The Central Asian steppes of the 12th century were not ruled by kings or guided by laws, but by hunger. Tribes clashed over water, horses, and honor. Loyalty was fragile, mercy rare. And in this world, women were more than just companions or caretakers, they were war spoils, tokens of status, instruments of revenge. To be taken as a bride often meant to be taken by force. Temujin's own mother had been kidnapped by his father during a tribal raid, ripped from her family and forced into a life she never chose. This was not an exception, it was the norm. Rape was not a crime, it was a custom. And from that custom, an empire would be born. As Temujin rose through the ranks, outwitting rivals and uniting fractured tribes, he did more than wield the sword. He crafted a new law, the Yassa. This secretive code governed the growing Mongol Empire with terrifying clarity. It regulated looting, loyalty, and women. Rape was not banned, it was codified. Under the Yassa, women of the conquered were to be distributed, not abused mindlessly but owned methodically. Beauty, virginity a prize, lineage a commodity. And behind this system stood a chilling spiritual belief that ancestry was sacred. To conquer a people's land was one thing, but to overwrite their bloodline, that was eternal. Genghis Khan did not want to merely defeat his enemies, he wanted to erase them. And so he made their women his, not as a show of cruelty but as a divine right. To him, every child born from a conquered womb was a living monument to his supremacy. But these were not isolated acts of lust, they were premeditated tools of psychological warfare executed with chilling precision. And the most devastating chapter was just beginning, because the womb once claimed would become the cradle of a new empire and a tomb for the old one. In the ruins of cities scorched by Mongol fire, something darker than ash lingered. Not just the silence of the dead, but the cries of the living, those left behind. Women torn from their families, forced into the arms of men who spoke no words of comfort, only conquest. But their suffering was not a side effect of war, it was war. Genghis Khan did not just raise cities, he replanted them with his own seed. This was not about bloodlust, it was about bloodlines. After the conquest of the Khwarazmian Empire in the early 13th century, Genghis ordered the extermination of entire male populations, soldiers, elders, even boys. But the royal women, they were spared, not out of mercy but out of calculation. These princesses and noble women, once symbols of dynastic power, were forced into the Mongol harem. Their status stripped, their futures shattered. Genghis himself took several concubines from royal bloodlines, including the daughter of a Persian governor. His generals followed his lead. Each woman they raped was another kingdom crushed not by sword but by seed. And the message was chillingly clear: your kings are dead, your gods are silent, your children are mine. Historians estimate that Genghis fathered hundreds, perhaps even thousands of children during his campaigns. But the numbers are not just folklore. In 2003, a groundbreaking genetic study found that nearly 1 in 200 men alive today carry a Y chromosome traceable to a single male ancestor in the Mongol region, dating back to the era of Genghis Khan. 16 million lives tied to one man. Each birth from a conquered womb was not just an act of dominance, it was a symbol of erasure, a new flag planted in flesh, a new generation born of violence and void. Imagine being a child born from that horror, a child with Mongol blood in his veins but whose mother wept each night remembering the family she was stolen from, the love she was forced to forget. These were not fairy tale princes, these were sons of suffering, walking emblems of obliteration. Yet to the empire, they were proof of Genghis' power. His legacy was not written only in chronicles or carved into stone, it was walking, breathing, multiplying. The Mongol Empire spread like wildfire, and at its center burned a singular, terrifying truth. One man had turned human reproduction into a weapon of imperialism. But rape was not reserved for generals and khans. The real horror came next, when this same strategy was handed down to the common soldier as a reward and a right. In the wake of every Mongol victory, silence fell. Not the silence of peace, but of submission. Cities that once echoed with prayers and market cries now reeked of blood, smoke, and fear. And in that silence, the victors claimed their prize. To the Mongol soldier, loyalty was rewarded not with medals or gold but with flesh. Women became the currency of obedience. The unspoken promise was clear: fight bravely and the bodies of the conquered would be yours. It was policy dressed as privilege. Historical accounts describe the aftermath of Mongol conquests with sickening regularity. The Persian chronicler Abd-al-Malik Javani wrote of towns emptied of men where women were dragged away in chains. After the sacking of Nishapur in 1221, over 100,000 corpses were left rotting in the streets. Men and children butchered indiscriminately, but the women were enslaved, sorted, distributed. Some were raped immediately, others forced to march barefoot across deserts toward Mongol camps where they would serve for years or die nameless in the dust. The most beautiful were paraded before generals, stripped of dignity, evaluated like cattle. There are records of captives being made to bathe, dress in fine silks, and kneel before warriors for selection, a grotesque inversion of royal courtship. But the horror was not just in the act, it was in the system. Age, status, and even religion offered no protection. Whether princess or peasant, Muslim or Christian, Buddhist or Hindu, none were spared. These were not isolated acts of chaos, they were structured atrocities. Mongol commanders issued quotas. Entire battalions were told which homes to enter, which women to take. Rape became routine, a ritual of ownership, a ceremony of victory. And yet, in the Mongol worldview, this was not cruelty, it was justice. To them, resistance to Mongol rule was a betrayal of divine order. To defy the Khan was to defy fate, and punishment, whether by blade or by bed, was righteous. Every woman taken, every womb forced into service, was considered part of a cosmic correction. The Mongols did not just see themselves as conquerors, they saw themselves as instruments of destiny. But how could such brutality be rationalized? How could rape, so deeply personal and devastating, be systematized into law? The answer lay in a single word: Yassa, a law born in shadow, wielded like a scythe. And under its cold, silent gaze, even the most monstrous acts found justification. It is easy to imagine the horrors of war as chaotic, lawless acts, random, senseless. But under Genghis Khan, even rape had rules. They called it Yassa, a secretive code of law said to be whispered by the great Khan himself and enforced without question. It was not written in stone, it was carved in flesh. The Yassa dictated loyalty, betrayal, theft, and conquest, but nowhere did it forbid rape. In fact, it permitted it so long as it served the aims of empire. And in the eyes of the Mongol elite, sexual domination was not a sin, it was a political tool. Conquest was seen as divine right. Genghis Khan believed himself chosen by Tingri, the eternal blue sky, the supreme deity of the Mongol cosmos. To resist him was not only foolish, it was blasphemous. And in this twisted cosmology, those who resisted deserved annihilation, not just of their bodies but of their bloodlines. Entire cities were condemned by accusation alone. If a village dared defy a Mongol envoy, if a governor failed to bow fast enough, his people became forfeit. Women were stripped, enslaved, raped, not as criminals but as cursed. Genghis was not cruel for cruelty's sake, he was calculating. After he took Bokhara in 1220, he entered the city's grand mosque. With ash still clinging to the domes, he stood before the terrified masses and declared, "I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." It was a sermon of fire. And when it ended, the killing began. And in the shadow of that mosque, women were dragged into tents, their screams were heard through the night. Religious identity offered no refuge. Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, none were exempt. Temples were torched, nuns defiled, even sacred texts were trampled under horses' hooves. The message was unmistakable. Your gods are weak, your laws are meaningless, your daughters are mine. By raping the wives of kings and governors, Genghis erased their legacy. By fathering children through noble bloodlines, he rewrote dynasties. What was once sacred was now soiled, what was once eternal had been replaced by him. And it did not stop with the first generation. Sons born from these acts were often raised as heirs, trained in Mongol ways, taught to see their mother's people as conquered and their father's vision as divine. But what of the women, what of the children, what became of those who lived on, haunted by blood that was not theirs to choose? The wombs that were broken gave rise to a new generation, but in that blood, a silence lingered, one that history rarely dares to name. The sword cuts once, but the child it leaves behind cuts for generations. In the years following Genghis Khan's conquests, a quiet transformation took root across Eurasia. Not in the ashes of cities, but in the cradles of the conquered. The children born of rape, the children born of empire. Many of the women forced into Mongol harems died soon after childbirth, some from injuries, others from despair. But those who lived raised children with the blood of both the oppressor and the oppressed, a lineage forged in brutality, torn between two worlds. These were not nameless children. Some were heirs to lands their mothers once called home, others were absorbed into the Mongol aristocracy, baptized not with love but with allegiance. To the Mongols, this was more than reproduction, it was dynasty building. Each child symbolized a conquered bloodline overwritten. Each mixed lineage, a flag planted deep in the veins of a dying culture. Genghis Khan's sons and grandsons inherited more than land, they inherited his strategy. Like him, they married the daughters of defeated rulers, absorbing their bloodlines into the Mongol fold. The act of rape became a form of diplomacy, a political union forged through violation. But for the children, what were they? To some, they were living symbols of Mongol greatness. To others, they were reminders of annihilation. Their identities straddled a chasm of shame and pride. In their veins flowed triumph and trauma. Imagine growing up in a gilded court clothed in silk, taught to ride and kill like a prince while your mother bore the eyes of someone forever grieving. Imagine being loved as an heir and hated as a reminder. And yet the legacy of these children has outlived empires. In 2003, a team of geneticists uncovered something startling. Nearly 16 million men alive today carry a Y chromosome that traces back to one common ancestor, an origin that leads directly to the Mongol heartland and the time of Genghis Khan. 16 million men, descendants not of love but of war. This revelation was not just a scientific curiosity, it was a reckoning. The Mongol Empire did not fade. It lives on, buried in our blood, passed from father to son, generation to generation, a legacy of conquest without a sword. An empire that whispers from inside the cell. And what does that say about us? That the most enduring monuments to Genghis Khan are not stone statues or ancient scrolls, but flesh, living flesh. Each drop of it carries the echo of a woman who cried in silence. And a world that looked away. But can blood built on violence ever truly forget, or does it carry that silence forever? Genghis Khan's empire was not built solely by sword or siege, it was built in bedrooms, in silence, in the stolen warmth of women who were never allowed to speak their suffering. His conquest stretched from the Pacific to the Caspian Sea, toppling kingdoms, erasing cultures. But his most enduring conquest was of blood itself, a campaign not just of violence but of forced reproduction. One that turned the female body into a tool of warfare and the womb into a weapon. History hails him as a genius, a unifier, a master strategist. And perhaps he was. But behind every tale of Mongol triumph lies 1,000 untold stories of pain, of defilement, of erased identities. These stories were never written in books, they were buried in bodies, hidden behind royal bloodlines and noble surnames, forgotten but never gone. So we must ask, if Genghis Khan lives on through the millions who carry his name in their genes, then where do the women live on? If history remembers the conqueror, who remembers the conquered? And if the conqueror lives on through blood, does the conquered live on through memory?